Many people now wonder whether taking drugs can be a useful aid in spiritual practice. We teach adamantly against the use of drugs for anyone doing a serious spiritual practice. The effects of drugs are very different than the effects of spiritual practices on the physical body, on the mind, and on the state of awareness. I want to share my experience because I'm in a unique position to speak, having experienced the use of some drugs and also having experienced some of the higher states of consciousness. When I was a child of about 11 years old, I had the unfortunate experience of trying many different drugs, including in one case a very large dose of the hallucinogen LSD. I've also done a lot of spiritual practice, including meditations lasting many months. And by the grace of my gurus, I've experienced a great shift in my normal day-to-day consciousness, and also have experienced the state of nirvikalpa samadhi and other blissful states of spiritual consciousness. And so from my experience, I want to speak a little bit about the difference between the effects of drugs on the mind and the body and the effects of spiritual practices. First, we should understand that spiritual consciousness comes about with a lot of practice. There's no quick or easy path. It's very tempting to believe that we can have a shortcut in the spiritual practice, but that's not the way that consciousness works. For a person who is having many negative emotions, many negative thoughts in the mind, it's very easy to perceive the effects of drugs as expansive. But when a person is feeling very peaceful and very happy, it appears that drugs have an effect of constricting consciousness, limiting consciousness. It depends upon where a person starts from, how they will experience the drugs. People say the hallucinogenic drugs, which they call psychedelic drugs like LSD and mushrooms and other hallucinogens like the DXM, which comes in cough syrup. People claim that they have mind-altering effects that expand consciousness in the same way that spiritual practices do. But it's difficult to speak on this subject unless a person has experienced the spiritual state of expansion, which comes only with diligent, dedicated practice over time. It is true that the drugs can alter a person's awareness. The visions induced by drugs are always limited. It is often that people taking drugs have a broadened sense of awareness to the extent that they may see, feel, experience things that they don't normally experience. And it is true they may experience things from the spiritual realms. But usually when taking drugs, people connect with the lower astral realm and not the higher astral realm. The connection is limited, and often it's at the expense of losing awareness and clarity of other things. Spiritual practice always leads to clarity, whereas the drugs lead to a lack of clarity. Western science surely has much to learn about the mind still. They're just beginning to get some understanding. But Western scientists can provide some very interesting, useful information there. Neuroimaging allows us to take photographs of the brain which show activity of various regions of the brain. Recent studies done in universities like Harvard University are showing that experienced meditators are using much more of their brain capacity than people in a normal state of consciousness. Of course, we've all seen or heard about the images of habitual drug users' brains, in which the exact opposite is going on, that the brain is functioning less. And so if we are expecting an expansion of consciousness, it should be that a person is getting a broader experience and accessing deeper levels of the brain function and not vice versa. In this way, the effects are very different. When I've taken hallucinogenic drugs, I can say that I had some unique experiences, unlike any experiences I had had before. But I testify from my experience that the effects of meditation are much greater, much deeper. Any blissful feeling I've experienced on drugs, I've had 1,000,000 times greater bliss in my meditations. Any visions induced by drugs have been much less than the clear awareness which has come from meditation. Many years ago, I noticed that if I drank a little bit of alcohol, that the body would get a sensation of tingling and the mind would get a sensation of a buzzing feeling in the mind. My guru at that time encouraged me to drink just a little bit of alcohol, never to get drunk. Ayurveda teaches that alcohol can have a balancing effect on the doshas, especially Vata dosha. And for my health, my guru said it's okay to have a drink or two if you want that. Just don't be dependent. It won't stop your spiritual progress. Don't depend upon it, and don't ever get drunk, he said. I felt like I shouldn't depend upon any external thing. And I felt that I shouldn't drink. But I actually felt better after a stressful day at work. And I actually could sleep better drinking just a drink or two of alcohol in the evening. And so occasionally I would do that. But as I kept meditating, the nerves in the body became calmer, and the anxious feelings and thoughts in the mind cleared. And I felt very happy and very nice. And so when I drank alcohol, the same buzzing feeling felt like a numbing feeling that didn't feel at all pleasant. When a person's normal state of consciousness is unpleasant, then drugs may feel pleasant. When a person is feeling very happy to begin with, then the numbing sensations of the drugs don't feel good. It becomes clear to see that it's a limiting experience. Some people say that shamans and other spiritual teachers have used drugs to help a person begin to experience things of the spiritual realm so they can have faith to do a spiritual practice. I have never met a true spiritual teacher teaching in this way. A true spiritual teacher realizes that there is no quick or easy fix, and that people don't see things for a reason. Maya prevents people from seeing certain things. Until a person is ready to experience things in the spiritual realm, this is a safety measure that the universe has implemented to keep a person from becoming overwhelmed by things they cannot handle. It's neither helpful nor does it teach a person anything about spirituality to try to induce a quick and easy opening of spiritual perception. As a person's mind becomes calm, as they learn to accept the experience that they're currently having, then their experience naturally expands. But this happens through practice of controlling the mind. Meditation gives a person much more control of the mind. An experienced meditator is much less likely to get startled also much less likely to get sick, even as environmental factors around may be compromising the health of other people. A person who takes a lot of drugs often becomes paranoid and becomes much more likely to get sick because of the way the drugs compromise the health of the body and the immunity. There's some misunderstanding that Hinduism teaches people to use drugs. They say at the time of Mahashivaratri, for worshipping Lord Shiva, that many people take bhanga or marijuana. And many people do in India, but this is not a practice given by the gurus. This is a practice that people caught in worldliness choose to do, which is contrary to the practice of yoga and spiritual practice in general. It is true that our scriptures say that marijuana relates to Lord Shiva, but they also say that datura, another toxic plant, relates to Lord Shiva. People don't tend to use datura as a narcotic, even though it can have some mind-altering effects, because it can be very dangerous. It kills a person, and by all accounts, from the people who haven't been killed by consuming the plant, it doesn't give a pleasant feeling at all. Lord Shiva is also Lord Rudra, the destroyer, and so it's said that he relates to many things that harm the human anatomy. In the Vedas they describe Lord Rudra carrying a bow and arrow and shooting, and with a sword, and they relate him to thieves and to soldiers and to liars and to violent violent weather patterns. This doesn't mean that we should take a sword and cut off our hand, or take a bow and arrow and shoot ourselves in the heart, any more than it means that we should take drugs which harm the body. Ayurvedic medicine uses marijuana as a healing herb, but Ayurveda has knowledge that marijuana is toxic to the human body. In particular, Ayurveda teaches that marijuana is toxic to the liver. And so before it's used for any healing preparation, it undergoes a process of purification called shodhana, through which the toxic substances in the drug are neutralized, and also the narcotic effects of the drug are somewhat neutralized. There's also some misunderstanding about the use of plants in spiritual practice on account of some of the mistranslations of the Vedas. We plan to prepare a video on this subject. The Vedas talk about Soma. Soma is a god, and Soma is related to plants in the Vedas. Some of the first translators of the Vedas were Christians from Europe. They had been raised in a Christian society to think in terms of Christian metaphysical system and a Christian theology. These translators were at a disadvantage to understand some of the concepts of Vedic thought. In their attempts to understand the blissful states of consciousness attained through doing spiritual practices and offering the Vedic sacrifices, the Christian missionaries failed to get a clear sense of what was implied, because their experience of the world and their belief system limited them from being able to understand what was intended as the sages talked about Soma. Many misconceptions have come from this, and many misconceptions are believed by the Hindu people in India even now. It's important to understand that the Vedas have not advocated the use of drugs, and that the realized saints in India have not advocated the use of drugs in spiritual practice. but they have advocated the practices which give a person increased health and better mental stability, because these lead to an expansion of consciousness, and drugs lead to nothing but suffering and dependence upon the external world. People talk about the visions they've experienced as they've taken drugs, and they feel certain that they've had a deep and true spiritual experience. People come to me and they talk about the lights they've experienced in meditation, and they ask me, isn't this the light of God I've seen? Isn't this a wonderful experience? And I tell them, no, it's not the light of God. This is the light of something lesser. This is the light of some negative emotional pattern leaving from your mind. As you're meditating, you become calm, and so you're experiencing the thoughts and feelings in the form of light. Your experience is expanding. But what you're seeing is not yet God. You have to look deeper. Many schizophrenics have told me of similar experiences to those described by people taking drugs. In either case, I would say that there may be some truth and some reality to the experience, but that it's not the deepest experience possible. One schizophrenic man I knew was homeless. He seemed always to be very unhappy and very afraid. He had some difficulty to keep himself from saying things that were very upsetting to people, and so he was often being beaten by the people around him. In the winter, I saw that he never had a coat. We saw many people give this guy a coat, and the next day he had lost it and had no recollection from his own accounts of what had happened to the coat. He had a great deal of trouble to take care of himself. Sometimes he would be hungry and people would give him food, and he would get rid of the food before he could eat it. This is how troubled he was by schizophrenia. Yet some of the experiences which he shared with me, I could see were genuine experiences. Sometimes he would be running around afraid, saying that tall black figures were chasing him, 15 feet tall. Perhaps this was only in his mind. Other times he would say things that I knew he was getting from some place in reality. One time I was sitting on a bench and I was putting beads on a mala, a rosary. In our Hindu tradition we use 108 beads. And so I was counting as I was putting beads on the string. And he sat down, and I could tell he wanted to talk. And so I turned to him and I said, give me just a minute. I'm counting these beads. I don't want to lose count. I've done a lot of work here. I want to finish. I'm getting close. Let me count the rest of the beads, and then I'll talk to you. And so he saw me counting. I guess he wanted to count also. He took some money out of his pocket. He had about 20 or 30 $1 bills. $30 he had there, something like this. And he counted, he counted, he counted. And as I kept stringing the beads on my rosary, I was silently counting also. And when I finished, I thought to myself, but I didn't say anything, I thought, okay, 108. And so I turned to him and I said, okay, I've finished, I just need to tie a knot here so I don't lose my work, and then I'll be happy to talk to you. And he looked back at me and he said, I also am finished and I have $108. And he put it in his pocket. He clearly didn't have $108 with him. But he did come to that number, 108, I believe, because he got the thought from my mind where I was thinking that. But he appeared to have no idea where that thought came from, and he probably thought that he had $108. It seems it may be easy to confuse a person like this and to steal their money if a person wanted to take advantage of his condition. He was having some supernatural sort of experience of the thoughts in my mind but he neither had the clarity to understand what he was experiencing, nor the ability to control that experience without being afraid of it. This is why we would say he was sick, and not that he was a realized soul having an expanded perception of reality. When a person is hallucinating on drugs, the experience is similar. Sometimes they may feel happy about what they experience, but other times they may feel very frightened and very upset about the experience. And a person using drugs has no control over that, nor do they have any control over what they experience. They may experience some aspects of spiritual reality, but the drugs never give a person clarity to understand that experience or to benefit from it, or to grow spiritually. In the same way, a schizophrenic person is limited by his disease. A drug user is limited necessarily by the use of drugs. Every narcotic substance has its own particular set of symptoms as it hurts the body and hurts the mind. It may be that people have to take drugs and come to the pain and suffering that the drugs create for them to be able to learn why drugs don't help anyone in their spiritual practice. But I can say from my experience of taking drugs that if you're seeking bliss, you'll find much more bliss by meditating, but it takes time and it takes discipline. Don't expect immediate results in meditation. But if you practice regularly, the mind will become calmer and the body will become healthier. And as this happens, the consciousness will expand. In my own experience of taking drugs, I've seen it to alter my brain functioning adversely. I've had to do extra meditation to undo the adverse effects of the drugs. And by the grace of God, I've been blessed with the discipline to take the necessary steps and the faith to not get discouraged in my spiritual practice. I pray that the people who watch this video may be influenced toward avoiding intoxicants and seeking the transcendent bliss, which is much beyond the experiences which people usually have as they live their day-to-day lives, and much beyond also any experience which can be induced by a chemical substance. In the time that I took drugs, the mind was troubled with many negative thoughts and many negative feelings, and at moments the drugs induced states of consciousness and experiences which seemed very blissful, but it was at a huge cost to my ability to function in the world, and my happiness at times that I was not taking drugs. And it was always unpredictable. I'm happy to say now that I experience at every moment a bliss much greater than that ever that I experienced from taking many, many drugs. I urge you as spiritual seekers to seek that bliss, seek that light within yourself, which is much greater than what any external thing can ever give you. Seek that light. Do not visualize it, but allow the vision to come to you. In the same way you allow the vision to come to you as you watch television. You don't visualize, but you allow your eyes to see. Allow your spiritual eye to see the truth of the universe. Expansion of spiritual consciousness is acceptance of living here. And it's a broadened experience of being in the body Even in the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, where there is no awareness of body, no connection to the body, there is awareness. There is a deepened state of awareness of all that is. We must seek to clarify our minds and not dull them. Western psychiatrists wrongly prescribe tranquilizer drugs which numb people's feelings to help them deal with mental illness, when really people who are mentally ill need to experience the thoughts and feelings, and they need to come to a place of clarity where they don't attach to the thoughts and feelings. Things which dull the mind, things which control the mind, lead us to being bound to the world. Things which increase a person's control of the mind. Not the thoughts, not the feelings, but the response to the thoughts and the feelings within the mind. Things which help us to gain more control over our responses to our experiences. Allow experience to deepen. This is the nature of spiritual practice, which is very different from the effects of taking drugs.